Honestly, there are a million wide receivers you can start this week. I mean, these guys are exciting from the very top to the very bottom. Tyreek Hill is going to be in his own tier, though. 22.9 points per game. Literally nobody else is above 20 in a half PPR format. Going up against New England, I honestly don't even care about the matchup. He is the Christian McCaffrey of the wide receiver position. Now, dropping down to our second tier, we are going to have A.J. Brown leading us off here at 2. I understand everybody wants to go Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs will be at 3. Diggs has had more points per game than A.J. Brown this season. And yeah, everybody got pissed at us for going A.J. Brown last week. We're running it back, though. A.J. Brown, a beautiful matchup going up against the Washington Commanders, where we saw DJ Moore and Justin Fields a few weeks back have a good game, where the Commanders allowed 30 points to pretty much every single team that they play. And right now, you have Philly's massive favorites in this game. Now, going over to 4, we will have Keenan Allen. With Keenan, I am not going to lie to you. I did not draft much of him this year. I was sitting here going, okay, you got Mike Williams. Keenan Allen's going into year 10. Plus the fact that they just drafted Quentin Johnston, who I thought checked a lot of boxes coming into this year's draft. Well, no, everything is broken in favor of Keenan Allen. Mike Williams, no longer here. Quentin Johnston, a literal dud. Keenan Allen is averaging 18.5 points per game right now. That is only behind Tyreek Hill. It is tied with Stephon Diggs at the current moment. I know he wasn't great last week, but he had 9 targets. He's going to be just fine. Jamar Chase will be our next wide receiver at 5. If you were looking at my rest of season fantasy football rankings, I will have Jamar Chase higher than this. The issue that I'm going to have with Jamar Chase for this week in particular is just a very tough matchup going up against the 49ers. Then Amon-Ra St. Brown will be our next wide receiver at 6. With St. Brown averaging about 16.5 points per game, you're going up against the Raiders on Monday night. And yeah, 100% with Amon-Ra St. Brown. This is an offense that did not look good last week. But even in a game where they get boat raced, St. Brown almost has 20 targets. Jared Goff goes for over 50 passing attempts. So we've seen what happens in games where the Lions win. St. Brown dominates. We've seen games where the Lions lose. St. Brown dominates, does not matter. And also, what's really cool for that Monday night game, because so many of y'all have signed up with code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy over the past few weeks, Underdog is hooking up literally everybody who's used code FLOCK. Doesn't matter if it was 2 years ago, last year, yesterday, today, tomorrow, with an Amon-Ra St. Brown special pick of more than less than half a total yard for Monday night. Plus, if you are new to Underdog Fantasy, you are also going to be getting a Josh Allen special pick of more than less than half a total yard for Thursday night. Plus, if you're new, a 100% deposit match with promo code FLOCK, our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers. So please make sure you are taking advantage of that if you have not done so already. And one of my favorite pick'ems currently for this weekend is going to be Christian Watson to have fewer than 58.5 receiving yards. Something we'll talk about later on in this video. Now, Cooper Kupp will be our next wide receiver at 7. I understand Kupp was very disappointing. I get it. He's going to be just fine. I'm not too worried at all. Honestly, in my rest of season rankings, I actually may have him higher than this. It is a tough matchup going up against Dallas, however. Now, dropping down to our next tier, it's hard to get away from this. We are going to have Adam Thielen at 8. With Adam Thielen, it's a pretty decent matchup going up against the Houston Texans. Plus, if you're looking at what we've had so far this season, the only wide receivers to average more points per game than Adam Thielen have been Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill. Adam Thielen is the wide receiver 5 from a points per game perspective in a half PPR format. Very difficult to get away from him. I am a little bit concerned. I think I would still rather have Puka rest of season. We're going to have Puka here at 9. With Puka, he was a guy I didn't believe in at the very beginning of the season. He changed my mind a few weeks in, and now we actually called him a buy low guy last week. I have to throw in the towel to say, yeah, he's a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 rest of the way. With CeeDee Lamb, he has not been good this year. CeeDee Lamb has averaged 12.1 half PPR points per game. I still stand by rest of season. I probably want Lamb over Thielen. It is just difficult to go through and make that ranking right now when they've been so far apart all year. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to have Davante Adams at 11. With Davante Adams averaging 13.5 points per game, going up against the Detroit Lions, I understand he has been very disappointing, and I am not going to fault you at all if you do not want to start Adams here. My thought process is, hell, if he just held on to his touchdown last week, he would have scored 20 points. Nobody would be worrying about him in the slightest. He's averaging over 10 targets per game. And you have Jimmy G back in. So I'm in on Adams, even if Myers has outproduced him so far. Michael Pittman will be our next guy at 12. With Pittman, he's at the very top of the NFL in targets as well. Underdog has his pick him hovering right around 60 yards this next week. Don't love the matchup against the Saints. Kind of is what it is. There's so much passing volume in this offense, and it's a better matchup than the Cleveland Browns were last week. Jordan Addison will be our next wide receiver at 13. With Addison, it's very funny, right? Because obviously we need to be starting him this week. Going up against the Packers, his Packers team has been a debacle all year now, and you have no Justin Jefferson. The funny thing is, though, you would say, oh, okay, a rookie wide receiver already ranked at 13. That means he's only going to get better from here. Well, obviously, later on in the year, whenever we do have Jefferson coming in, this will be something that we need to go through, and we may need to reevaluate. But as it stands now, he is a must-start guy. Then dropping down to our next tier, we're going to go DJ Moore at 14. With DJ Moore, we said it last week, but Justin Fields, through his NFL career, is like 5-27, has averaged 160 passing yards per game, has averaged about 1 passing touchdown per game. I don't necessarily think that the Chicago Bears are better without Justin Fields. I think that they're worse with this backup quarterback. I can't even pronounce his name. However, do I think the passing volume in this offense is better or worse? I think it's about the same. For DJ Moore in particular, I do not think it's a downgrade. I know that sounds very aggressive, but Justin Fields last year had the Chicago Bears the worst passing offense the NFL seen over the past decade. He didn't have a lot of passing volume this year either. So I think it's almost a similar situation to Gardner Minshew and the Indianapolis Colts, right? You'd rather have Anthony Richardson because of his rushing upside. But in terms of the passing volume, you put Gardner Minshew in this offense, and it's not like you really take away from the overall passing yardage on a week-to-week perspective. Now, Brandon Ayuk will be our next guy. With Ayuk, I'm going to operate under the assumption that we probably have no Deebo Samuel this week. I don't know. If Deebo does play, Ayuk's going to fall down. He'll still remain in this same tier. Will just be a little bit lower. Going up against Cincinnati, this is a game that could be very high scoring. I mean, what you're kind of hoping for is you're hoping that you have Joe Burrow at 100% strength, where the 49ers are actually going to have to go out there and throw it in the second half, but the 49ers are 5.5 point favorites right now. Now, Devonta Smith will be our next wide receiver at 16. Smith has averaged 9.5 fantasy points per game this year. That is laughably low. That is lower than anybody else in this tier. However, Smith has had the consistent target volume. He's in an elite offense. I still believe that he's a great talent. I don't see why that would be any different. And most importantly, you're going up against the Washington Commanders, arguably the best matchup you could get as a wide receiver. So even though he's been extremely disappointing, given the matchup, I still want to be starting him. Like, our next two guys have been way more productive, right? Nico Collins, Jacoby Myers, this season have been printing money while Smith has been making you cry in your starting lineup. Nico Collins has averaged 14.5 points per game. It's a good matchup against Carolina. I think you should start him. We have him at wide receiver 17. And Jacoby Myers has averaged 14.5 points per game as well. I mean, he is an 8-point dog going over to Detroit on Monday night. Maybe make the argument they're going to have to throw the ball in the second half. And obviously, if Jimmy G plays, it is good for Myers, right? Now, Mike Evans will be our next wide receiver. Evans is right there with Collins and Myers with their production so far this season. Mike Evans is actually, kind of less than Godwin if you look at just the raw target volume that these guys are getting week in and week out. However, we've seen now from Mike Evans over a large sample that he's just more efficient than Godwin, particularly right now. I do think it's a tough matchup going up against Buffalo. However, it's a Thursday night game as well. You're an 8.5 point dog. You have one of the lowest implied team totals of any team this week. Now, Jalen Waddle will be our next guy at 20. Jalen Waddle, kind of right in line with Devonta Smith, is at the very bottom of this tier in points scored so far this season. However, he is still in an elite offense. I still believe that he is a very good player. And at the same time, if you're looking at how Las Vegas is going out there and putting these team totals this week, you actually currently have the Miami Dolphins with the highest implied team total of any team in the NFL. So with that being said, I want pieces in this offense, as I always do. Now, Chris Olave will be our next wide receiver at 21. Olave was arrested for speeding. He was going 35 miles per hour over the posted limit. He was cooperative with officers. That's literally all I know. One thing that I've seen from the NFL for years now is unless you are really going to negatively impact the reputation of the league, you are probably going to get off with a slap on the wrist. And I would not be surprised at all if Olave just plays this week as if nothing happens. Maybe if this happened on Saturday night, Friday night, we'd be a little bit more concerned about it. But I don't know. I mean, you speed 35 miles per hour over. I don't know what speed limit he was in, blah, blah, blah. I think he probably does play. That's just my guess. The man had like 14 targets last week. Now, going over to our next here, we're going to have Garrett Wilson at 22. With Wilson, love the player. The issue is Zach Wilson. It always has been. I mean, if we're going to go through and look at what Wilson's done, Zach, that is, over the past few weeks, he's been better than so far through his NFL career. It's a decent matchup against the New York Giants. Just want to be realistic with this offense. George Pickens will be our next wide receiver at 23. You know what? I'm going to move Pickens lower than this, even though George Pickens has been more productive than anybody else in this tier, just because you have Deontay coming back in. We're going to move Pickens down to 25. Instead, we'll have Christian Kirk at 23. I mean, Kirk was a wide receiver we were selling high on at the beginning of the year. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, he has no Zay Jones. He now gets to play in 2 wide receiver sets. If Zay comes back in, maybe this changes. Nope, Kirk has kind of cemented himself as the wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville at this point. Not a great matchup going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, however. I mean, we would like to see like a better spot. You currently have the Jacksonville Jaguars favored by only 2.5 points in this game because this is a very tough defense. Now, Deebo Samuel will be our next wide receiver. Like I said, I think Deebo probably misses. I have no idea. I'm going to rank him here, and I'm going to promise you, I'm going to get you that updated list of flex rankings later on in this week when we have way more information regarding this Deebo Samuel injury. So please just make sure you are subscribed. Now, George Pickens, we already discussed. Zay Flowers will be our next guy at 26. Flowers have been great in Baltimore, right? I mean, I think everybody's been extremely impressed. At the end of the day, Zay Flowers averaged 10.1 fantasy points per game. That's including a large chunk of games where you had no Bateman, where you had no Odell. These guys are now playing, and by no means, they're not great receivers, but if they eat into the target share in a low volume passing attack anyway, trust me, I'm saying this is someone who spent the most money in fantasy drafts on Lamar Jackson this year than any other player. But still low volume passing attack. Still love Lamar given the rushing upside. They look great this past week, but it's just hard to be super, super viable given the offense. In this same game, we're going to have Hollywood Brown. Kind of the same sentiment. Hollywood's been averaging 10.5 points per game this year. You're going up against Baltimore. Don't love the matchup. You're 8.5 point dog. Kyler Murray is not going to be playing this week. You're hoping that you're going to get Kyler Murray back in next week. And then when Kyler does come back, then we can move Hollywood up these rankings. Chris Godwin will be our next wide receiver at 28. Godwin just consistently gets a ton of target volume, which is why if you look at my rest of season rankings, I'm actually going to have Chris Godwin a lot higher than we do here. The issue that we're going to maybe have right this second is just the fact that you are going up against the Buffalo Bills. You have one of the lowest implied team totals of any team this week. And like we said, Evans has just been the player with all the efficiency in the offense. Now, T. Higgins will be our last wide receiver in this tier. And I think that T. Higgins is an interesting guy to go through and look at. The hesitation that I'm going to have with T. Higgins, however, is you're going up against the 49ers. We have not seen you past this bone bruise. We have not, rib bruise. We have not seen Joe Burrow at 100% just yet. So I stand by. I think that T. Higgins is still an incredible buy low candidate. And rest of season, he will be much higher in our rankings. But in a tough matchup, when we're not 100% sure that he is 100% healthy at this point, we'll be a little bit hesitant to go out there and start him. Then Amari Cooper will be our next wide receiver, with Amari going up against Seattle. Very difficult to rank him. I'm going to assume that we have no Deshaun Watson. Now, of course, if Watson does surprise us and if Watson plays this next week, then at that point, I'd be moving Amari Cooper up these rankings, and I will keep y'all posted with those flex rankings later on in the week, but he's only averaged 9.5 points per game so far this season. Josh Downs will be our next wide receiver at 31. With Downs, he's actually averaged more points than Amari. He's at 9.8. Great week last week. Had the big time touchdown in a tough matchup against Cleveland. However, not a great matchup against the New Orleans Saints this week either. And while I want to believe in him, I drafted him in a ton of underdog drafts. He's one of the reasons why we are crushing underdog drafts right now. it is tough to be super, super confident in what we have at the moment. Now, DK Metcalf will be our next wide receiver at 32. DK Metcalf is higher than this in our rest of season rankings. DK Metcalf has averaged about 11 points per game so far this season, and he's been a low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3. My rest of season rankings, I'll have them. There is that low end wide receiver 2. The issue is you're not fully healthy, and you're going up against a Cleveland Browns defense that has been at the very top of the NFL so far this season. Yes, they allowed a lot of production over to Indianapolis, but I mean, obviously, any given Sunday, I still think you have to be terrified about this Browns defense, and Metcalf is not fully healthy. Terry McLaurin will be our next guy at 33. Tough matchup against the Eagles. I mean, right now, if you're looking at the spread of this game, it's actually, only 6.5, which is a little bit of a surprise, but still incredibly low implied team total for the Washington Commanders here. McLaurin's average 10.5 points per game. I just don't really see where the ceiling is. Deontay Johnson will be our next guy at 34. With Deontay, he comes in, and George Pickens still dominates targets. So we'll be interested to see how this trend continues over the next few weeks. We'll have Calvin Ridley at 35. Calvin Ridley's actually only averaged 9 points per game so far this season, making me happy that we have not drafted him at all, really. And also at the same time, this is a wide receiver that does have a tough matchup against Pittsburgh. Christian Watson will be our next wide receiver at 36. Very frustrating that I started Watson everywhere given the good matchup last week. Obviously goes down with the knee injury. If you look at his projected total on Underdog Fantasy, they have him at 58.5 total yards, which is significantly higher than a lot of other wide receivers that we have him ranked behind here. But I will say, one, I'd be interested in taking the fewer than 58.5 receiving yards. And two, this is a player that we probably need to be monitoring the injuries over the next few weeks. The injury over the next week. Rashee Rice will be our last wide receiver at 37. With Rashee Rice, he looks phenomenal from a per snap perspective. I know a lot of people have been upset with me saying do not start him just yet. He is my most invested into Kansas City Chief in drafts. He was the cheapest wide receiver, and we took him everywhere just because I thought Tony and Sky Moore were bums. Didn't know he was going to be any good, but Rashee Rice does look good. Looks like by far and away the most efficient wide receiver in this room. I would love to have Rashee Rice much higher than this. It's a great matchup going up against Denver. My hesitation, however, is he's still only running like 50 to 60% of the routes in this offense. They're still just involving so many wide receivers here. So I would love to have Rice higher than this. It is just going to be a little bit difficult to do so. But I think that's all I have for y'all with this video. If you have not done so already, go down there, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you wanted to check out that Christian Watson pick'em, less than 58.5 receiving yards for this week, or an Amon-Ra St. Brown special pick'em more than less than half a total yard, or a Josh Allen special pick'em more than less than half a total yard, you're going to get all those plus a 100% deposit match and our rest of season fantasy football rankings only with promo code FLOCK. You can find that link in the description in the comment section. So please make sure you take advantage of that. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.